regulated medical marijuana systems. So even though he announced he's repealing all the previous policies, quote unquote, back to 1980, at this time there's no budgeted money for that police action. When that happened, and I've never seen before when a U.S. attorney makes a statement and he's scoffed at and people ignore it essentially, but it created a lot of interest in really the actions and activities of the legislatures, because they're really the ones that need to act on this. When you go to Washington, are you committing to seeing through state protections for medical marijuana? And if so, what do you think is the best step to do there? There is some existing legislation. One, I think, was to remove it from the controlled substance list. The other one was to create a federal law that says the federal government can't prosecute in states that are medical marijuana for medical marijuana crimes. Do either of those appeal to your sense of legislative intentions, or do you see something better, or is that too far?
No, well, can I start with a story and let me tell you how personal this is to me?
Sure.
Do we have time for that? When I was, what was I doing in 1990? When I was a graduate student at University of Michigan, before I went to law school, and I had one of my best friends from college, Greg Witcher. And he's an amazing person, a kid who grew up in Anacostia, which is the poor section of D.C. And on the 10th anniversary of the assassination of MLK, he was a little kid, and he wrote an essay for school on the meaning of the assassination of Dr. King, and it was turned into a front-page feature on the Washington Post. And he got a scholarship to Exeter, and he got a scholarship to Williams College, which is where I met him, and he became a reporter after college. And we happened to live in the same place as First Boston. I was a union organizer, and he was working for the Globe, and then I came to graduate school in Ann Arbor, and he was working for the Wall Street Journal covering the auto industry here in southeast Michigan. Greg Witcher was a gay man who had HIV, and he died in my arms. Just by chance, I was taking care of him the night that he died. He was living with a friend of ours who was an administrative law judge. He had to go to Grand Rapids for a case, so he said, "You come take care of Greg tonight." I said, "Okay." Well, Greg Witcher, this is before the drug cocktails were there that saved people with, let them live for indefinitely. He wasted away. He was a beautiful, strong person. He weighed 85 pounds, I think, when he died. And marijuana was the only thing that helped him be able to eat at all and keep anything down and have any appetite and so forth. It was just an absolute necessity for him. And this, how long ago is that? Almost 30 years ago. But from that day to this, the importance of medical marijuana, it's just been a very, something I'm very aware of. And people with all kinds of different conditions, chronic pain and so forth. And these, this opioid crisis ought to make it clear that the medical establishment and the pharmaceutical companies with all their drugs, they don't necessarily have the right, solution for everything. I think, now back to your general point, President Obama had it right pretty much when he tried as best he could to say, this is ground that's shifting fast, the states are experimenting with this, let's back off as the federal government. He didn't have, you could argue he didn't lead enough, perhaps. I don't know if he could have passed, marijuana reform at the national level. But in any event, he passed, he enacted policies that said, look, we're going to back off and let the states begin experimenting with medical marijuana and recreational marijuana. And now it's obvious that this is gaining momentum, that the American people think marijuana should be regulated like alcohol, and and that of course it's needed for people with medical conditions where it's helpful. So when I go to Washington, we're going to reverse the Trump administration's policy, and we're going to let the trend towards legalization of marijuana continue. And I don't feel, I'm a kind of person who tells you when I don't know that I don't know. I'm not sure what the best way to do it is. Certainly not funding the enforcement of it is a potential avenue. But when we're able, we ought to say that marijuana is no longer a controlled substance, and the states can regulate it and tax it as they see fit.
Excellent.
Andy, this is kind of like what happened 100 years ago with the women's right to vote, where the states were experimenting at first, and maybe hopefully Congress will do something on a national level with an amendment.
All right. Andy, I want to thank you for calling in. This is Steve, the executive producer of the show. We are short on time. We're have to cut to our next segment, but we appreciate you calling in and sharing your stories and your viewpoints on this.
My pleasure. It's great talking with you. Have fun.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Very good. It's Andy Levin running for the 9th Congressional District, which encompasses 19 cities, including Royal Oak, Ferndale, Sterling Heights, Warren, St. Clair Shores, and many others. Andy Levin. All right, so we are going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and talk about forfeiture. And I do want to mention that on lawyer time, never on time, David Rudoy is blessed us with. He spent some time, I understand, in the Court of Appeals today, arguing about the enclosed lock facility, which is, as his last words to me before he left, it's just got to be enclosed, Mike, right? It's just enclosed. How'd it go? You left thinking that they liked you, which means they're going to write against you. But go ahead.
So, is this mic on?
Yes.
Yeah. So I came in.
By the way,
I think I had 3 judges against me based on the briefs. They were going to give me the same old bullshit. Like, they started off right away with, like, it's a bad law. Like, we agree that it's poorly written, which I never said. It's poorly written, and so. But
you went first. You went first.
I went first. So, like, I get it. I start off actually with what we brainstormed.
Did you tell them that I told you to say that? No. Okay.
I didn't throw out a shout out to Michael Kamar.
It's a footnote. You tell them I'm going to be there next week.
But the gotcha, like, this law was not created to create, like, we didn't create the Medical Marijuana Act to make gotcha felonies. Is kind of how I started it off, and then I started getting into it, and they're like, well, yeah, but we understand it's like, I think I got to, like, saying it's absurd, like, we can't allow these absurd results. And they're like, yeah, I mean, we agree that it's, like, horribly written, but this is what it says. And, like, I could see them all, like, in agreement. And I feel like by the end of it, I changed.
How? What did you say?
Minds.
Because it doesn't say that. What does it say?
It says the plants must be kept in an enclosed lock facility. That's the
statute.
The statute says that.
But
and so I started off by saying, you wear your clothes kept. Like, my clothes are kept in my closet, but I'm wearing them. That doesn't change that they're kept in my closet. And then we moved to, and then they said something like, well, there's no law saying.
Because the point is it's kept.
Yeah.
Kept does not mean in a state of permanence by which it never moves.
Correct. And there's only one case. There's one case on the issue. It's People v. Thompson. And Michigan Supreme Court.
I think Manuel is.
Yeah, Manuel addresses that.
Yeah, but it's kept. The word kept, People v. Thompson. I mentioned Manuel as well. But People v. Thompson directly defines it. And it's where they
From the Act?
No, they're finding him guilty of keeping and maintaining a drug vehicle. And the Supreme Court said, like, it doesn't require that much continuity. Just some degree of continuity, right?
It's got to be at least 2 contexts. Am I right about that?
Yeah, exactly. That's that. So, but that's pretty much. I brought that up, and then they were like, "Yeah, but it's they weren't really like buying it until I brought up to them. I'm like, if you go with their definition that the people want you to take, that keep means at all times, then it says kept in an enclosed locked facility. So you're telling me that nobody can ever unlock the door ever. If they go into the room, they are a felon. If you can watch them go in, And that's when the judges, like, 2 of them were kind of both like, oh, shit, like, that clearly doesn't make any sense. and then I feel like the other thing I really turned them with was mentioning that in Hartwick-Tuttle, they define the 4 elements you have to prove, and element 3 is stored in an enclosed lock facility. I'm like, there's no evidence that he was storing those plants anywhere besides inside. And I feel like the Boonstra kind of bought, like, that was like, he needed something to hang his hat on. And then when the prosecutor got up, it was pretty funny. She gets up there, she's like, you know, I'm relying on my brief. She, like, argued about the facts for a minute, like, said the facts were different than I laid them out. And then she said, do you guys have any questions? And Boonstra goes, you know, something about, like, these absurd results. Like, don't you think that Oakland County, we see them here all the time, like, don't you think you guys could exercise some prosecutorial discretion on this one? And she fumbled around that for like 2 minutes and eventually said, I can't say I disagree with you. Swear to God. Who was it?
Was that Beth
Rayanne Ruddy.
Oh.
Is that the one from Trost?
No, different prosecutor. She was really nice. But she didn't even like, she was like, well, you know, this act is poorly written. I agree with you. And, you know, we're all just trying to figure out what it means. She was like apologizing for the prosecutor's office fucking this guy over. Like, even she felt bad, I feel like, about. I mean, the story of Joel Selman is a fucking tragedy. He in case the listeners don't know, he's, you know, in his 60s. Very
By the way, he used to
sick
listen
man.
to Planet Green Trees until I didn't take his trial case. But keep going.
But you know, 60s grower.
No.
For himself,
I'll tell you this: he's an
18
Israeli
plants.
paratrooper.
Yeah, Israeli paratrooper. I mean, he does.
Dual
if anybody
citizenship.
deserves,
He's an injured from jumping out of planes in a
if
military
anybody
somewhere.
deserves
Yeah.
medical marijuana, this
It's
guy
him.
does. He's within his limits. He has 18 plants. He's carded for 36. He takes 4 plants out to fumigate them. He bought clones that had spider mites. These were like babies. And he wanted to get the spider mites off of them. Takes them outside. Cops show up. And he's a felon. In no way, there's no controlled buys. There's no text messages. He wasn't doing shit wrong. He took his plants outside. And they denied him all defenses for medical marijuana. Made him go to trial without being able to mention medical marijuana at all. Jordan Zupke, shout out. He did his best with his hands tied behind his back. And now
That's
he's a
another
felon.
issue. That issue wasn't raised, right?
No,
Because
that issue was raised.
well, was that argued today?
Yeah.
Because
But I pretty much just said Tros.
Tros.
I just said Tros and said what the ruling, like, quoted from that opinion, and they were like, but I don't. How would it have changed the trial? That was a tough question a little bit because I knew it was a possible one. Like, because they could say it's harmless error, you know, which I was like, you can't say how it would have changed the trial. I don't know. I'm not gonna.
what was the relevance?
I'm not gonna guess.
How would it have come out?
I just kept saying res gesti, that, like, this case says, I don't remember the case, but this case says that the jury is entitled to know the context of the crime, the res gesti of the crime.
Sure.
They're entitled to it. And they were like, well, how did it change the trial? And I said he wasn't allowed to testify. He got up to testify for himself. He couldn't tell his story. They censored him multiple times. There were all these objections in the prosecutor's brief. And I don't know. I feel like they bought that one a little bit, but they're probably going to say that was like harmless error, like the judge in the context of that, because Tros was fact specific. So they could say in that case maybe not. Either way, it's harmless error. But I feel like the kept thing, the kept is the most important part.
Well, you know, there's a continuation in the Tros. The fact pattern is, you know, that they went and get turned away. That's relevant. Like you try to buy and you can't buy and get turned away. Why? And if medical marijuana comes out of that, that is a totally part of the case. You can't. But Joel's situation was one time. It's like a snapshot in time, but they saw it, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, the people's argument is like in King and Kalanick, they talk about like what they're talking about is at the time of the charged offense, whether they're kept there or not. That's like their argument. And there is that language there, but they're still kept.
Well, what about
they were
the
never kept outside?
What about the
They're
one?
always-
What about the? I know in Manuel they talk about because they're allowed to transport it. Right, the justification is because plants fall in this category of being lawfully transported from position A to position B. Clearly, there would be a time that they are not inside of the locked closed facility being kept. I mean, they may ultimately end up there.
I should note there's another argument here. Joel would kill me if he heard me. Like, it was on his locked porch. Like, he had a back porch with railings that were locked. And he had these little baby clones
Was it
out there.
screened in?
Huh? It was not screened in. It was not enclosed on top. But that's an issue, too. But also, like...
Did the definition exist at the time? I don't think it did, did it?
It did not. It did not.
So what were they doing? Were they